If you still can't fall asleep, then welcome to Sound from the Darkness. Night 1, the index finger. I have a very close friend. Ever since he graduated from medical school, he inherited a large fortune from his parents, enough for him to live lavishly for the rest of his life without working. But he neither liked women nor enjoyed luxury. His passion was collecting all sorts of strange and bizarre stories. Most of the time, he wasn't home. He traveled constantly. He had no other friends, and in others' eyes, he was a weirdo. Coincidentally, I'm also someone who's curious about the unusual, so we got along well. Whenever he encountered something odd, he would call me to share his excitement. This time was no different. He called and said that after traveling around, he had brought back many new and fascinating stories. Since I was on vacation, I went straight to his house and even decided to stay there. Every night, I listened to one strange story from him, one story each evening. That night, my friend was smoking when he raised his index finger mysteriously and said, "Look, the index finger represents human greed, because the desire to eat is the most basic and primitive of all desires. Do you know why it's called the food finger in Chinese? Because the ancients said that when one sees delicious food, this finger starts to twitch, hence the idiom, the food finger moves. Now, let me tell you a story about this very finger." He put out his cigarette and began his tale. When I was traveling in a small southwestern town, I lodged in an old man's house. The man was very old, but still sharp. We often chatted, and it was from him that I heard this story. During the Republican era, in that region, if a girl wanted to marry into a good family, she had to have a good figure, especially a slender waist. Some families even had exact measurements down to the millimeter. The thinner the girl, the more beautiful they thought she was, completely opposite to the Tang dynasty's ideal of plump beauty. People there despised fatness, believing it ugly and pig-like. So all the girls starved themselves, hoping to have a soft, willowy figure. There was one girl named Zhu. Once she learned that her happiness in life depended on her waistline, she stopped eating meat or even noodles. But fate likes to play tricks. No matter how much she exercised or how little she ate, only some fruit a day, she still got fatter. Maybe it was genetics or illness, but people back then didn't think that way. The slim girls mocked her behind her back, calling her a reincarnated pig spirit. Her parents sighed constantly, worried that no one would marry their daughter, not even the poorest families. Now, the poorest of these families was the Laosi family. Their son, Min, had been Zhu's playmate when they were children. But after Zhu set her sights on marrying into wealth, she cut ties with him. Min, however, always kept her in his heart. Eventually, Zhu's parents, desperate to marry her off, mentioned it to Laosi. Min's family, though poor, was honest and agreed immediately. Within a single day, all the marriage customs, proposal, dowry, and wedding feast were completed. Zhu resented her fate, but there was nothing she could do. Min was gentle, loving, and obedient, and life went on peacefully. Then something strange happened. After marrying into Min's family, Zhu began to lose weight. She gradually became thin and was soon known as the most beautiful woman in the area. But she was already married. Still, many men coveted her, and in that region, remarriage was no big deal. Wives were merely tools for bearing children and improving family fortune. Zhu became restless. She refused to have children, which made Min miserable. He knew that unless she became fat again, she would never settle down. Indeed, not long after, she grew plump again. Everything returned to how it was before. She blamed fate. Min, meanwhile, secretly laughed but outwardly comforted her. Years passed. Zhu eventually gave birth to several children and stopped dreaming of wealth. Life went on quietly until their daughter, Yue'er, grew up. Yue'er was beautiful, inheriting the best of both parents. Her body was perfectly balanced, neither thin nor fat, though her mother thought she was still too round. Afraid her daughter would share her misfortune, Xu began to restrict her diet from a young age. But it didn't help. By 16, Yue'er's waist was thicker than other girls. Zhu lost sleep over it. One night, seeing his wife tormented, Min finally said, "Do you know why you suddenly lost weight after marrying me?" Zhu looked puzzled. "Why?" "Because I used a secret technique passed down in my family," Min said quietly. "Our ancestors warned it was forbidden magic. If used too often, it brings retribution, though no one knows what kind." Xu, long past the age of anger, only felt curious. "Never mind the past. Tell me the method. We must help Yue'er. She needs to marry into a good family." Min hesitated, then raised his index finger. "It's this finger." He explained that centuries ago, their ancestor had sheltered a beggar during a famine, who turned out to be a wandering Taoist from Mount Mao, in gratitude. The Taoist taught the ancestor several spells. Most were lost over time, except one, the slimming spell. But from then on, the family's fortune declined, perhaps because of the curse tied to the use of such magic. To perform the spell, one only needed to swallow the nail of their own index finger. The effect lasted only a few years, and repeated use could cause terrible consequences. Zhu didn't care. The next day, Min used the spell for their daughter. Soon after, Yue'er became the slimmest, most graceful girl in the area. Neighbors praised her beauty, and her parents beamed with pride. Coincidentally, the richest man in town was seeking a bride for his son, with strict measurements down to the smallest unit. Yue'er tried but missed the mark by a hair. Zhu, desperate, forced Min to cast the spell again. Min warned her, "You've heard of the old legend of the messenger who could run hundreds of miles a day by stabbing silver needles into his feet. The greater the result, the greater the price. The next level required cutting off one's kneecaps to double the speed. The same applies here. If you want her thinner, the price will no longer be just a fingernail." "Then what?" Zhu demanded. "It would require her to eat her own index finger," Min said. Zhu agreed immediately, and Yue'er, wanting to make her mother happy, obeyed. She bit off her own finger and swallowed it. The next morning, she became stunningly thin, perfect by all standards. The rich man's family was delighted, and the marriage was settled. The matter of her missing finger was easily explained as a childhood accident. From then on, the family lived comfortably on the rich man's gifts. The region remained peaceful despite the wars elsewhere. Before long, Yue'er became pregnant and gave birth to a boy, but soon after, her body began to swell like a balloon, uncontrollably. Her in-laws were horrified and threatened to cast her out if she didn't slim down again. Zhu begged her husband for help. After consulting old records, Min discovered that the spell was broken by heavy blood loss, such as during childbirth. Zhu refused to accept it and cried, then cast it again. "I don't care what it costs. Save our daughter." This time, the spell demanded more. The parents' own index fingers had to be cut off and fed to their daughter, a kind of transfer through blood ties. They did it, enduring excruciating pain, and watched over Yue'er all night. By dawn, she had regained her former beauty. They sent her back to her husband's home, and everyone was amazed. But that very night, Yue'er died. Her death was horrific. Her body gnawed to the bone as if by countless creatures. Blood and flesh were scattered everywhere. It looked as though she had tried to crawl out of bed toward the door before dying in agony. Min stared at her corpse, tears streaming down his face. Because the death was too gruesome, the rich family kept it secret, claiming she died of sudden illness and paying Min and Zhu a large sum to leave town. Zhu, consumed by guilt, hanged herself soon after. Min vanished without a trace. People later said that Mao Shan magic was a form of spirit manipulation, transferring flesh, illness or misfortune between living beings. Swallowing the finger symbolizing gluttony meant forming a pact with hungry ghosts, tiny, ant-like spirits that devour anything. They eat away unwanted fat, but once uncontrolled, they consume the entire body. My friend leaned closer and whispered, when I finished listening to the old man's story. I couldn't help touching my own index finger. The old man smiled and walked away. Only then did I notice he had only 4 fingers. His index finger was missing. Later, I asked around, but no one knew him. They said he had come after the liberation and was known only as Old Min. I sat speechless, subconsciously rubbing my own index finger. Images of swarming ants flashed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. My friend laughed and slapped my shoulder. Don't worry. Some things exist, some don't. Forcing them won't change anything. I replied, not necessarily. Everything depends on human will. He looked at me and smiled faintly. Have you ever heard the story of half a face? No. I looked at him, and for a moment his face seemed stiff and clay-like. Forget it. I'll tell you tomorrow. Look, the sun's already up. He pointed out the window. Morning light streamed in. That night, I couldn't sleep.